The Path of Purification, Visuddhimagga, of Bhadantācariya Buddhaghosa, published by the Buddhist Publication Society, Kandy, Sri Lanka. Part 2, Concentration, Samadhi.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Chapter 4, The Earth Kasina. Extracts. Passage 74 to 113. Absorption in the cognitive series. So while he is guiding his mind in this way, confronting the sign, then knowing now absorption will succeed, there rises in him mind door adverting, with that same Earth Kasina as its object, interrupting the occurrence of consciousness as life continuum, and evoked by the constant repeating of earth, earth. After that, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel on that same object, the last one of which is an impulsion of the fine material sphere. The rest are of the sense sphere, but they have stronger applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and unification of mind than the normal ones. They are called preliminary work, consciousnesses, because they are the preliminary work for absorption, and they are also called access consciousnesses, because of their nearness to absorption, or because they happen in its neighborhood, just as the words village access and city access are used for a place near to a village, etc. And they are also called conformity consciousnesses, because they conform to those that precede the preliminary work consciousnesses and to the absorption that follows. And the last of these is also called change of lineage, because it transcends the limited sense sphere lineage and brings into being the exalted, fine, material sphere lineage. But omitting repetitions, then either the first is the preliminary work, the second access, the third conformity, and the fourth change of lineage, or else the first is access, the second conformity, and the third change of lineage. Then either the fourth in the latter case or the fifth in the former case is the absorption consciousness, for it is only either the fourth or the fifth that fixes in absorption, and that is according as there is a swift or sluggish direct knowledge. Beyond that, impulsion lapses and the life continuum takes over. But the Abhidhamma scholar, the elder Godatta, quoted this text: preceding profitable states are a condition, as repetition condition for succeeding profitable states, adding, it is owing to the repetition condition that each succeeding state is wrong, so there is absorption also in the 6th and 7th. That is rejected by the commentaries with the remark that it is merely that elder's opinion, adding that it is only either in the 4th or the 5th that there is absorption. Beyond that, impulsion lapses. It is said to do so because of nearness of the life continuum, and that it has been stated in this way after consideration, so it cannot be rejected. For just as a man who is running towards a precipice and wants to stop cannot do so when he has his foot on the edge, but falls over it, so there can be no fixing in absorption in the sixth or the seventh because of the nearness to the life continuum. That is why it should be understood that there is absorption only in the fourth or the fifth, but that absorption is only of a single conscious moment, for there are 7 instances in which the normal extent of the cognitive series does not apply. They are in the cases of 1. The first absorption, 2. The mundane kinds of direct knowledge, 3. The 4 paths, 4. Fruition next after the path, 5. Life continuum jhana in the fine material and immaterial kinds of becoming, 6. The base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception as condition for cessation of perception and feeling, and 7th, the fruition attainment in one emerging from cessation. Here the fruition next after the path does not exceed 3 consciousnesses in number. The consciousnesses of the base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception as condition for cessation do not exceed 2 in number. There is no measure of the number of consciousnesses in the life continuum, in the fine material and immaterial kinds of becoming. In the remaining instances, the number of consciousness is 1 only. So absorption is of a single consciousness moment. After that, it lapses into the life continuum. Then the life continuum is interrupted by adverting for the purpose of reviewing the jhana, next to which comes the reviewing of the jhana. The first jhana, at this point, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, he enters upon and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with happiness and bliss born of seclusion. And so he has attained the first jhana, which abandons 5 factors, possesses 5 factors, is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics, and is of the Earth Kasina. Herein, quite secluded from sense desires means having secluded himself from, having become without, having gone away from sense desires. Now this word, quite, should be understood to have the meaning of absoluteness, precisely because it has the meaning of absoluteness. It shows how, on the actual occasion of entering upon and dwelling in the first jhana, sense desires, as well as being non-existent, then are the first jhanas, contrary opposite, and it also shows that the arrival takes place only eva through the letting go of sense desires. How? When absoluteness is introduced thus, quite secluded from sense desires, what is expressed is this: sense desires are certainly incompatible with this jhana. When they exist, it does not occur, just as when there is darkness, there is no lamplight, and it is only by letting go of them that it is reached, just as the further bank is reached only by letting go of the near bank. That is why absoluteness is introduced. Here it might be asked, but why is this word quite mentioned only in the first phrase and not in the second? How is this might he enter upon and dwell in the first jhana, even when not secluded from unprofitable things. It should not be regarded in that way. It is mentioned in the first phrase as the escape from them, for this jhana is the escape from sense desires, since it surmounts the sense desire element, and since it is incompatible with greed for sense desires. According as it is said, the escape from sense desires is this, that is to say, renunciation. But in the second phrase, the word eva should be adduced and taken as said as in the passage. Bhikkhus, only here is there an ascetic, here a second ascetic. For it is impossible to enter upon and dwell in jhana unsecluded also from unprofitable things. In other words, the hindrances other than that sense desire. So this word must be read in both phrases thus: quite secluded from sense desires, quite secluded from unprofitable things. And although the word secluded as a general term includes all kinds of seclusion, that is to say, seclusion by substitution of opposites, etc., and bodily seclusion, etc., still only the three, namely bodily seclusion, mental seclusion, and seclusion by suppression or suspension, should be regarded here. But this term, sense desires, should be regarded as including all kinds, that is to say, sense desires as object, as given in the Nidesa in the passage beginning, what are sense desires as object? They are agreeable visible objects, etc., and the sense desires as defilement, given thereto in the Vibhanga thus: zeal as sense desire, kama; greed as sense desire; zeal and greed as sense desire; thinking as sense desire; greed as sense desire; thinking and greed as sense desire. That being so, the words quite secluded from sense desires properly mean quite secluded from sense desires as object and express bodily seclusion, while the words secluded from unprofitable things properly mean secluded from sense desires as defilement or from all unprofitable things and express mental seclusion. And in this case, giving up of pleasure in sense desires is indicated by the first, since it only expresses seclusion from sense desires as object, while acquisition of pleasure in renunciation is indicated by the second, since it expresses seclusion from sense desire as defilement. And with sense desires as object and sense desires as defilement expressed in this way, it should also be recognized that the abandoning of the objective basis for defilement is indicated by the first of these two phrases, and the abandoning of the subjective defilement by the second. Also, that the giving up of the cause of cupidity is indicated by the first, and the giving up of the cause of stupidity by the second. Also, that the purification of one's occupation is indicated by the first, and the educating of one's inclination by the second. This firstly is the method here when the words from sense desires are treated as referring to sense desires as object. But if they are treated as referring to sense desires as defilement, then it is simply just zeal for sense desires, kama chanda, in the various forms of zeal, chanda, greed, raga, etc., that is intended as sense desires, kama. And although that last is also included by the word unprofitable, it is nevertheless stated separately in the Vibhanga in the way beginning. Herein, what are sense desires? Zeal as sense desire, because of its incompatibility with jhana. Or, alternatively, it is mentioned in the first phrase because it is sense desire as defilement, and in the second phrase because it is included in the unprofitable. And because this last has various forms, therefore, from sense desires is said instead of from sense desire. And although there may be unprofitableness in other states as well, nevertheless, only the hindrances are mentioned subsequently in the Vibhanga thus. Herein, what states are unprofitable, lust, etc., in order to show their opposition to and incompatibility with the jhana factors. For the hindrances are the contrary opposites of the jhana factors. What is meant is that the jhana factors are incompatible with them. Eliminate them, abolish them. And it is said accordingly in the Betakopadesa, concentration is incompatible with lust, happiness with ill will, applied thought with stiffness and torpor, bliss with agitation and worry, and sustained thought with uncertainty. So in this case, it should be understood that seclusion by suppression or suspension of lust is indicated by the phrase quite secluded from sense desires, and seclusion by suppression or suspension of all five hindrances by the phrase secluded from unprofitable things. But omitting repetitions, that of lust is indicated by the first, and that of the remaining hindrances by the second. Similarly, with the three unprofitable roots, that of greed, which has the five cords of sense desire as its province, is indicated by the first, and that of hate and delusion, which have as their respective provinces the various grounds for annoyance, etc., by the second, or with the states consisting of the floods, etc., that of the flood of sense desires, of the bond of sense desires, of the canker of sense desires clinging, of the bodily tie of covetousness, and of the fetter of greed for sense desires, is indicated by the first, and that of the remaining floods, bonds, cankers, clingings, ties, and fetters is indicated by the second. Again, that of craving and of what is associated with craving is indicated by the first, and that of ignorance and of what is associated with ignorance is indicated by the second. Furthermore, that of the eight thought arisings associated with greed is indicated by the first, and that of the remaining kinds of unprofitable thought arisings is indicated by the second. This, in the first place, is the explanation of the meaning of the words, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things. So far, the factors abandoned by the jhana have been shown. And now, in order to show the factors associated with it, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, is said. Herein, applied thinking, vitakana, is applied thought, vitakka. Hitting upon is what is meant. It has the characteristic of directing the mind onto an object, mounting the mind on its object. Its function is to strike at and trash, for the meditator is said, in virtue of it, to have the object struck at by applied thought, trashed by applied thought. It is manifested as the leading of the mind onto an object. Sustained thinking, vicharana, is sustained thought, vichara. Continued sustainment, anusancharana, is what is meant. It has the characteristic of continued pressure on, or occupation with, the object. Its function is to keep connascent mental states occupied with that. It is manifested as keeping consciousness anchored on that object. And though sometimes not separate, applied thought is the first impact of the mind in the sense that it is both gross and inceptive, like the striking of a bell. Sustained thought is the act of keeping the mind anchored, in the sense that it is subtle, with the individual essence of continued pressure, like the ringing of the bell. Applied thought intervenes, being the interference of consciousness at the time of first arousing thought, like a bird spreading out its wings when about to soar into the air, and like a bee's diving towards a lotus when it is minded to follow up the scent of it. The behavior of sustained thought is quiet, being the near non-interference of consciousness, like the birds planing with outspread wings after soaring into the air, and like the bees buzzing above the lotus after it has dived towards it. In the commentary to the Book of Tools, this is said, applied thought occurs as a state of directing the mind onto an object, like the movement of a large bird taking off into the air by engaging the air with both wings and forcing them downwards. For it causes absorption by being unified. Sustained thought occurs with the individual essence of continued pressure, like the bird's movement when it is using or activating its wings for the purpose of keeping hold on the air, for it keeps pressing the object. That fits in with the latter's occurrence as anchoring. This difference of theirs becomes evident in the first and second jhanas in the fivefold reckoning. Furthermore, applied thought is like the hand that grips firmly, and sustained thought is like the hand that rubs. When one grips a tarnished metal dish firmly with one hand and rubs it with powder and oil and a woolen pad with the other hand. Likewise, when a potter has spun his wheel with a stroke on the stick and is making a dish, his supporting hand is like applied thought, and his hand that moves back and forth is like sustained thought. Likewise, when one is drawing a circle, the pin that stays fixed down in the center is like applied thought, which directs onto the object, and the pin that revolves round, it is like a sustained thought, which continuously presses. So this jhana occurs together with this applied thought and this sustained thought, and it is called accompanied by applied and sustained thought, as a tree is called accompanied by flowers and fruits. But in the Vibhanga, the teaching is given in terms of a person in the way beginning. He is possessed fully possessed of this applied thought and this sustained thought. The meaning should be regarded in the same way thereto. Born of seclusion. Here secludedness, viviti, is seclusion, viveka. The meaning is disappearance of hindrances. Or alternatively, it is secluded, vivita, thus it is seclusion. The meaning is the collection of states associated with the jhana is secluded from hindrances. Born of seclusion is born of or in that kind of seclusion. Happiness and bliss, it refreshes, pinayati, thus it is happiness, piti. It has the characteristic of endearing, sampiyayana. Its function is to refresh the body and the mind, or its function is to pervade, thrill with rapture. It is manifested as elation, but it is of 5 kinds as minor happiness, momentary happiness, showering happiness, uplifting happiness, and pervading rapturous happiness. Herein, minor happiness is only able to raise the hairs on the body. Momentary happiness is like flashes of lightning at different moments. Showering happiness breaks over the body again and again like waves on the seashore. Uplifting happiness can be powerful enough to levitate the body and make it spring up into the air. For this was what happened to the elder Mahatissa, resident at Punyavalika. He went to the shrine terrace on the evening of the full moon day. Seeing the moonlight, he faced in the direction of the great shrine at Anuradhapura, thinking, "At this very hour, the 4 assemblies are worshipping at the great shrine." By means of objects formerly seen there, he aroused uplifting happiness with the enlightened one as object, and he rose into the air like a painted ball, bounced off a plastered floor, and alighted on the terrace of the great shrine. And this was what happened to the daughter of a clan in the village of Vattakalaka near the Girikandaka monastery when she sprang up into the air, owing to the strong, uplifting happiness with the enlightened one as object. As her parents were about to go to the monastery in the evening, it seems in order to hear the Dhamma, they told her, "My dear, you are expecting a child. You cannot go out at an unsuitable time. We shall hear the Dhamma and gain merit for you." So they went out, and though she wanted to go too, she could not well object to what they said. She stepped out of the house onto a balcony and stood looking at the Akasa Chaitya shrine at Girikandaka lit by the moon. She saw the offering of lamps at the shrine and the 4 communities as they circumambulated it to the right after making the offerings of flowers and perfumes, and she heard the sound of the mass recital by the community of bhikkhus. Then she thought, how lucky they are to be able to go to the monastery and wander round such a shrine terrace and listen to such sweet preaching of Dhamma. Seeing the shrine as a mount of pearls and arousing, uplifting happiness, she sprang up into the air, and before her parents arrived, she came down from the air into the shrine terrace, where she paid homage and stood listening to the Dhamma. When her parents arrived, they asked her, "What road did you come by?" She said, I came through the air, not by the road. And when they told her, my dear, those whose cankers are destroyed come through the air, but how did you come? She replied, as I was standing looking at the shrine in the moonlight, a strong sense of happiness arose in me with the enlightened one as its object. Then I knew no more whether I was standing or sitting, but only that I was springing up into the air with a sign that I had grasped, and I came to rest on this shrine terrace. So uplifting happiness can be powerful enough to levitate the body, make it spring up into the air. But when pervading, rapturous happiness arises, the whole body is completely pervaded, like a filled bladder, like a rock cavern invaded by a huge inundation. Now this fivefold happiness, when conceived and matured, perfects the twofold tranquility, that is, bodily and mental tranquility. When tranquility is conceived and matured, it perfects the twofold bliss, that is, bodily and mental bliss. When bliss is conceived and matured, it perfects the threefold concentration, that is, momentary concentration, excess concentration, and absorption concentration. Of these, what is intended in this context by happiness is pervading happiness, which is the root of absorption and comes by growth into association with absorption. But as to the other word, pleasing, sukhanna, is bliss, sukha, or alternatively, it thoroughly devours, consumes bodily and mental affliction. Thus, it is bliss, sukha. It has gratifying as its characteristic. Its function is to intensify associated states. It is manifested as aid, and wherever the two are associated, happiness is the contentedness at getting a desirable object, and bliss is the actual experiencing of it when got. Where there is happiness, there is bliss, but where there is bliss, there is not necessarily happiness. Happiness is included in the formations aggregate. Bliss is included in the feeling aggregate. If a man, exhausted in a desert, saw or heard about a pond on the edge of a wood, he would have happiness. If he went into the wood's shade and used the water, he would have bliss. And it should be understood that this is said because they are obvious on such occasions. Accordingly, this happiness and this bliss are of this jhana or in this jhana. So in this way, this jhana is qualified by the words with happiness and bliss and also bond of seclusion. Or alternatively, the words happiness and bliss, piti sukhang, can be taken as the happiness and the bliss independently, like the Dhamma and the discipline, Dhamma, Vinaya. And so then it can be taken as seclusion, born happiness, and bliss of this jhana or in this jhana. So in this way, it is the happiness and bliss rather than the jhana that are born of seclusion. For just as the words born of seclusion can be taken as qualifying the word jhana, so too they can be taken here as qualifying the expression happiness and bliss. And then that total expression is predicated of this jhana. So it is also correct to call happiness and bliss born of seclusion a single expression. In the Vibhanga, it is stated in the way beginning, this bliss accompanied by this happiness, the meaning should be regarded in the same way thereto. First jhana, this will be explained below, enters upon upasampajja, arrives at. Reaches is what is meant, or else taking it as makes enter, then producing is what is meant. In the Vibhanga, this is said, enters upon, the gaining, the regaining, the reaching, the arrival at, the touching, the realizing of, the entering upon, upasampada, the first jhana, the meaning of which should be regarded in the same way, and dwells in viharati, by becoming possessed of jhana of the kind described above, through dwelling in a posture favorable to that jhana. He produces a posture, a procedure, a keeping, an enduring, a lasting, a behavior, a dwelling of the person. For this is said in the Vibhanga, dwells in, poses, proceeds, keeps, endures, lasts, behaves, dwells. Hence dwells is said. Now it was also said above, which abandons 5 factors, possesses 5 factors. Herein, the abandoning of the 5 factors should be understood as the abandoning of these 5 hindrances, namely lust, ill will, stiffness and torpor, agitation and worry, and uncertainty. For no jhana arises until these have been abandoned. And so they are called the factors of abandoning. For although other unprofitable things too are abandoned at the moment of jhana, still only these are specifically obstructive to jhana. The mind affected through lust by greed for varied objective fields does not become concentrated on an object consisting in unity, or being overwhelmed by lust, it does not enter on the way to abandoning the sense desire element. When pestered by ill will towards an object, it does not occur uninterruptedly. When overcome by stiffness and torpor, it is unwieldy. When seized by agitation and worry, it is unquiet and buzzes about. When stricken by uncertainty, it fails to mount the way to accomplish the attainment of jhana. So it is these only that are called factors of abandoning because they are specifically obstructive to jhana. But applied thought directs the mind onto the object. Sustained thought keeps it anchored there. Happiness produced by the success of the effort refreshes the mind whose effort has succeeded through not being distracted by those hindrances, and bliss intensifies it for the same reason. That unification aided by this directing onto, this anchoring, this refreshing, and this intensifying evenly and rightly centers the mind with its remaining associated states on the object consisting in unity. Consequently, possession of the 5 factors should be understood as the arising of these 5, namely, applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and unification of mind. For it is when these are arisen that jhana is said to be arisen, which is why they are called the 5 factors of possession. Therefore, it should not be assumed that the jhana is something other which possesses them. But just as the army with the 4 factors, and music with the 5 factors, and the path with the 8 factors, Eightfold Path, are stated simply in terms of their factors, so these too should be understood as stated simply in terms of its factors when it is said to have 5 factors or possess 5 factors. And while these 5 factors are present also at the moment of access and are stronger in access than in normal consciousness, they are still stronger here than in access and acquire the characteristic of the fine material sphere. For applied thought arises here, directing the mind onto the object in an extremely lucid manner, and sustained thought does so, pressing the object very hard, and the happiness and bliss pervade the entire body. Hence it is said, and there is nothing of his whole body not permeated by the happiness and bliss born of seclusion. And unification too arises in the complete contact with the object that the surface of a box lid has with the surface of its base. This is how they differ from the others. Although unification of mind is not actually listed among these factors in the summary version, beginning, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, nevertheless, it is mentioned later in the Vibhanga as follows. Jhana, it is applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, unification, and so it is affected too. For the intention with which the Blessed One gave the summary is the same as that with which he gave the exposition that follows it. It is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics. The goodness in 3 ways is in the beginning, middle, and end. The possession of the 10 characteristics should be understood as the characteristics of the beginning, middle, and end too. Here is the text. Of the first jhana, purification of the way is the beginning. Intensification of equanimity is the middle, and satisfaction is the end. Of the first jhana, purification of the way is the beginning. How many characteristics has the beginning? The beginning has 3 characteristics. The mind is purified of obstructions to that jhana. Because it is purified, the mind makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is a sign of serenity. Because it has made way, the mind enters into that state. And it is since the mind becomes purified of obstructions, and through being purified, makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is a sign of serenity, and having made way, enters into that state, that purification of the way is the beginning of a first jhana. These are the 3 characteristics of the beginning. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the beginning, which possesses 3 characteristics. Of the first jhana, intensification of equanimity is the middle. How many characteristics has the middle? The middle has 3 characteristics. He now looks on with equanimity at the mind that is purified. He looks on with equanimity at it as having made way for serenity. He looks on with equanimity at the appearance of unity. And in that he now looks on with equanimity at the mind that is purified, and looks on with equanimity at it as having made way for serenity, and looks on with equanimity at the appearance of unity, that intensification of equanimity is the middle of the first jhana. These are the 3 characteristics of the middle. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the middle, which possesses 3 characteristics. Of the first jhana, satisfaction is the end. How many characteristics has the end? The end has 4 characteristics. The satisfaction in the sense that there was non-excess of any of the states arisen therein, and the satisfaction in the sense that the faculties had a single function, and the satisfaction in the sense that the appropriate energy was effective, and the satisfaction in the sense of repetition are the satisfaction in the end of the first jhana. These are the 4 characteristics of the end. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the end, which possesses 4 characteristics.